Just the latest critical look at the Cuomo administration's policies when it comes to its own handling of COVID-19 in nursing homes.
So, how did we get here and what happens next? Here's Two on Your Side's Jackie Roberts.
Due to their vulnerability to the virus, nursing home residents have been a concern since the start of the pandemic. But an order by the Cuomo administration in late March became the root of a lot of criticism in the months to follow. The order said no resident shall be denied readmission or admission to the nursing home solely based on a confirmed or suspected diagnosis of COVID-19, and barred nursing homes from even testing them for it.
They don't have the right to object. That is the rule and that is the regulation, and they have to comply with it.
The order was rescinded in May. By January of this year, the state attorney general, who had been investigating deaths in nursing homes, released a report that claimed in part government guidance requiring the admission of COVID-19 patients into nursing homes may have put residents at increased risk of harm and obscured available data to assess that risk. It also claimed more nursing home residents died from COVID than what the state health department data reflected.
When they said there was undercounting, that's just factually inaccurate.
The state health commissioner insisted his department had been transparent, saying its practice had been to count COVID-related deaths of those who died within their long-term care facilities separately from those who died in a hospital while being treated for COVID-19.
Who cares? 33, 28, died in a hospital, died in a nursing home. They died.
That comment following the report sparked outrage among some lawmakers, which has only increased after the New York Post article. Now, a growing number of elected officials, including several Democrats, are calling for the governor's executive powers to be rescinded. Others want a federal investigation, and State GOP Chair Nick Langworthy went one step further, saying the governor should be impeached. Jackie Roberts, Channel 2 News.